So I'm going to thank Rebecca at the end of the talk when she's here. But I also want to actually thank all the students actually who have been helping and supporting this conference to go so smoothly and nicely. Especially Sophie, she's going to translate my talk, and she has been helping us even before we arrived in Mexico. And also, of course, I want to thank you all to be here this afternoon. It's beautiful outside, and instead, you are willing to actually stay in this room listening to my talk on Nenbutsu. So I found it quite incredible, because I was actually ready to go for a nap. So I really, really, really appreciate that you being here. So thank you very much for coming and being part of this.
La doctora agradece mucho que todos estén aquí, que estudiaran esta gracia que saben que afuera hace muy buen clima, ¿no? Y queremos vivir por aquí, lógicamente. También agradezco a todo el equipo de la UNAM, que quería agradecer a Rebeca, ¿no? Y a todas las personas que han asistido a la realización de este escenario. Y bueno, yo voy a traducir su ponencia. No lo voy a hacer justicia, pero lo voy a intentar.
That's it. Well, my talk is going to be on something very different from previous talks. I am not going to talk about, who are they? Nishida. I'm not going to talk about, who else? Nishitani, Watsuji. I'm not going to even mention Fudo or Basho, anything of that sort. I'm going to actually talk about Hōnen, who is a Japanese medieval Buddhist, okay? And specifically, I'm going to talk about his ideas of the Nenbutsu. Are you familiar with what the Nenbutsu is? Some of you? You're familiar with it? Who is saying that? Oh yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Deguchi Sensei is actually familiar, so maybe he can tell us what it is. Yes, so Deguchi Sensei, what is the Nenbutsu?
It's a sort of practice of Buddhism. Just return the name of Buddha. One of the easiest way to get to the nirvana.
Yes, it is supposed to be the easiest, simplest, actually, Buddhist practice. So maybe after this talk and you want to get enlightened, you might want to remember this recitation. And I'm kidding, but that's all. It's not all there is, but that's what the Nenbutsu is. Yes. Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Ella, a diferencia de las otras conferencias que ha dado, no va a hablar nada acerca de ni de Nishida, ni de Nishitani, ni de Watsuji, ni del Fudo, ni nada de eso. En cambio, va a hablar de un monje budista medieval llamado Hōnen, y específicamente acerca de lo que él dice acerca del Nenbutsu, que es una práctica dentro del budismo. El profesor Deguchi ya nos explicó a grandes rasgos. Básicamente el Nenbutsu es la recitación del nombre de Buda, y es considerada la manera más fácil de llegar a la iluminación, de salvarse, ¿no? Entonces de eso nos va a hablar la doctora Inukai, y pues nada más comenta que si alguno de ustedes después de esta conferencia pues quiere iluminarse, lo que deciden practicar el Nenbutsu.
Okay, so if you are even slightly interested in Buddhism in general, and specifically Japanese Buddhism, actually Hōnen is somebody that you will for sure encounter if you are looking at the history of Japanese Buddhism. Okay, so if you know a little bit about Japanese Buddhism, you will see actually that there's no almost need to argue the significance and importance of Hōnen. And in fact, his book, his masterpiece called, in Japanese, Senjaku Hongan Nenbutsu, or in English, it literally means passages of the selection of the Nenbutsu. And that actually he wrote in the 12th century.
Bueno, si alguno de ustedes está interesado en la filosofía japonesa, seguramente se ha topado o se topará, si apenas están entrando en eso, con el nombre de Hōnen, que es un personaje fundamental en la historia del pensamiento japonés, y sobre todo por su obra principal, que en japonés se titula Senchaku Hongan Nenbutsu, que desde ahora en adelante la voy a llamar Senchaku para no hacer todo el nombre, y que es pues su obra maestra, ¿no?
So what is so distinctive about actually Hōnen is that he very strongly insists the only sole actually adherence to the Nenbutsu as a Buddhist practice. And in fact, actually I mean not Buddhist practice, Nenbutsu practice, okay? And Nenbutsu practice and also Pure Land, Jodo thoughts had already been brought to Japan even before Hōnen, but it was actually Hōnen who actually emphasized the only sole use actually of the Nenbutsu. So his actually insistence of this, actually I would think, in fact marks it is something quite revolutionary, in fact, in Japanese Buddhism, because it actually is when this, well, his insistence actually represents departure, probably, from the earlier teachings of Japanese Buddhism.
Lo que Hōnen propone es, bueno, dentro del budismo existen muchas prácticas que se sugieren a lo largo de las distintas tradiciones de cómo es la mejor manera o la manera más efectiva para llegar a la iluminación. Y la práctica que sugiere Hōnen es la más adecuada, es la práctica del Nenbutsu, y él cree que es la más efectiva, y él insiste en que esta práctica es la mejor y la única que se necesita en realidad para ser salvado, ¿no? Y la insistencia en la práctica del Nenbutsu es una acción que le parece bastante revolucionaria porque implica un distanciamiento de la tradición anterior a Hōnen, ¿no? Que insistía en otro tipo de prácticas mucho más complejas e incluso elitistas para llegar a la iluminación.
Yes, but even so, actually, unfortunately, this book called the Senchakushu, that's how I'm going to refer to from now on, okay? The Senchakushu has not drawn much attention from philosophers, in fact, okay? And unlike Dogen's Zen texts, I think that Dogen's text might actually be read more by philosophers, definitely, than Hōnen's Senchakushu. And I am not going to speculate why that is so here, but my purpose here is not just to defend Hōnen, in fact, as an interesting text, but I am going to just talk about how interesting actually Hōnen's views of the Nenbutsu are, okay, and how ingenious, in fact, Hōnen was in his own distinctive ideas of Nenbutsu.
Bueno, dentro de la tradición se le ha dado más importancia, se ha leído mucho más a Dogen sobre Hōnen, sobre el texto de Hōnen, el Senchakushu ha sido un poco relegado, no ha sido leído tanto como de Dogen. Sin embargo, la profesora Yumiko no busca especular, porque esto es así, lo único que quiere es hablar acerca de lo interesante que resulta la obra de Hōnen, específicamente lo que dice acerca del Nenbutsu, y explicar por qué a ella le parece especialmente ingenioso.
So actually the title, if you look at the title, okay, of the book, Senchaku Hongan Nenbutsu, okay, there's a word, selection, okay, Senchaku actually in Japanese, it means selection. Okay, so this book, the text, is not just a religious book where Hōnen gives some explanation of the primary practice of Jodo Buddhism, but rather I think that he actually gives very strong reasons, justification for the selection of the Nenbutsu as the only efficacious practice for all, including monks and lay people like us.
En este texto, bueno, si analizamos un poco el título del texto, Senchaku, la palabra Senchaku en japonés significa selección, ¿no? Y en este texto no es solamente un texto religioso dogmático que dice que el Nenbutsu es la práctica ideal, sino que parece que lleva a cabo una justificación muy buena acerca de por qué esta práctica es más efectiva que las otras para cualquier tipo de persona, no solo para el monje, sino para cualquier persona normal.
Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing, it is clear actually that I'm going to talk a little bit about Hōnen's personal psychological journey. Okay? If you look at some anecdotes and story about Hōnen, okay, it is well known that Hōnen actually possessed vast, very firm actually knowledge of a lot of actually Buddhist scriptures and teachings, okay, because he actually studied 30 years, in fact, at Mount Hiei. Okay? So definitely his teachings of the Nenbutsu are based on his vast knowledge of Buddhist teachings and scriptures and all those. However, okay, I think that what is more important and also interesting and intriguing about Hōnen's view is that his actually teachings are deeply, deeply grounded actually in the genuine convictions that he arrived at through his personal actually experience of himself rather than just texts and scriptures.
Yo voy a hablar acerca, claro que voy a mencionar el camino, como la travesía personal psicológica de Hōnen. Sí voy a hablar de esas cosas porque pues es bien sabido que Hōnen tenía un gran conocimiento de las escrituras y los textos budistas antiguos, ¿no? Sin embargo, lo que a mí me resulta más importante es el hecho de que las enseñanzas que Hōnen predica están arraigadas a las cosas que él mismo, a las que él mismo llegó a través de sí mismo, a través de su propia experiencia.
Okay, so that's one very interesting, distinctive actually aspect of Hōnen's view. Another one that I'm going to talk about today, okay, that is quite distinctive in Hōnen's, is his actually strong emphasis of this required psychological condition for the Nenbutsu actually to be properly recited. Okay, psychological actually condition. And in order for the Nenbutsu to be truly efficacious and worthwhile.
Otra cosa que me interesa remarcar el día de hoy acerca de Hōnen es una condición, un requisito psicológico que él pide al practicante del Nenbutsu para que la práctica del Nenbutsu sea verdaderamente efectiva.
Okay, so this psychological actually condition I'm going to talk about later, but it has something to do with the self. Okay, this is where I'm connecting, the idea of self with the more or less the theme of this conference. Okay, but the kind of self that actually is going to emerge in Hōnen is very different, I'm sure, from what we have been talking about as communal or ecological self. Okay? In fact, it is also very different from the type of self that a lot of Buddhists might actually talk about. Okay? So that is actually the self that the nature of the self, okay, that Hōnen realized in his psychological journey is called bonpu. Bonpu is a Japanese term to refer to actually ordinary people like us. If you're enlightened, I'm sorry to include you guys, but every single human being, okay, ordinary being, filled with desires, attachments, aversions, right? Also some destructive emotions and ignorance. Okay, so bonpu refers to just ordinary person, and this realization of the self that is critical in Hōnen's idea is actually the self as bonpu. Okay, so it is not actually the self as interdependently existing or self as something conventionally constructed out of some components, as some Buddhists might say. Okay, so this is again another interesting, I think, aspect of Hōnen, who never talks about the self in the way that other Buddhists might have talked about.
Bueno, esta condición psicológica que se requiere para la práctica del Nenbutsu tiene que ver con el sí-mismo, ¿no? Que es lo que hace que pues, yo pueda hablar acerca de, que pueda enmarcarme dentro del tema de este seminario. Pero este sí-mismo que emerge del Nenbutsu, como lo explica Hōnen, es muy diferente del sí-mismo al que nos hemos estado refiriendo dentro de este seminario, y también es muy diferente al sí-mismo que normalmente muchos otros maestros dentro de la tradición budista, del cual muchos maestros de la tradición budista hablan, ¿no? Para Hōnen, este sí-mismo que emerge a partir del darse cuenta, el caer en cuenta de cuál es la naturaleza del sí mismo, ¿no? Y caer en cuenta de cuál es la naturaleza del sí mismo es caer en cuenta de que este sí mismo es el Bonpu, ¿no? Y el Bonpu básicamente es la persona ordinaria, cualquiera de nosotros que no está iluminado, que tiene apegos, que tiene deseos, que tiene emociones, ¿no? Entonces, al darnos cuenta que somos este Bonpu, este ser que está pegado a cosas, es muy diferente no solo del sí mismo que hemos estado hablando a lo largo del seminario, sino también de la manera en la que se habla normalmente del sí mismo dentro de la tradición budista.
So I'm going to conclude by actually giving my own claim, actually. So I'm going to argue in the end, hopefully this will come out at the end, is that Hōnen actually, by offering this seemingly simple, easy method of the Nenbutsu that any person could adopt, by actually offering such a practice, in the end, actually, Hōnen actually offered the method that could achieve what Dogen famously said in Genjo Koan, that is, I'm quoting in English, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Okay? So eventually, in the end, by using the Nenbutsu rather than sitting meditation, very hard sitting meditation for a long time, actually Hōnen actually gave us the method to achieve this in the end, the forgetting the self. That is, in fact, the critical goal of any Buddhist practice.
Y bueno, yo lo que deseo hacer en esta charla, con lo que deseo concluir es con lo que yo considero que nos ofrece esta práctica del Nenbutsu de Hōnen, que es básicamente al ofrecernos un método simple que cualquier persona normal puede llevar a cabo, está logrando lo que en general la tradición budista desea que se haga en la práctica del budismo, ¿no? Que es la máxima de el estudiarse a sí mismo es el olvidarse de sí mismo, ¿no? Creo que con este método del Nenbutsu Hōnen nos está dando pues, el método ideal para llegar a esta meta.
Okay, so let me first talk about a little bit about Hōnen's journey, which ended it with encounter with commentaries on one of the Pure Land main sutras by Shantou or Zendo. Okay, so as I said earlier, right, that his conviction about the efficacy of the Nenbutsu was not just coming from his intellectual study. So it wasn't intellectual conviction, but rather it was personal, in fact, conviction, right? Strong realization, personal one. Okay, and that had something to do with what he had to go through. Okay, when he was practicing, in fact, a Buddhist way. Okay, at Mount Hiei. Okay, it is often actually told that Hōnen had diligently and quite rigorously practiced and studied the precepts of a lot of different Buddhist schools for 30 years. 30 years, actually. It's a long time, in fact. I'm going to stop here.
Y algo que me gustaría resaltar es, como mencioné al principio, es acerca el camino personal que Hōnen tuvo que seguir. Y lo que me parece muy interesante es que la convicción que Hōnen tenía en la eficacia del Nenbutsu como método para llegar a la iluminación no nace de una convicción intelectual, ¿no? De una meditación que haya realizado por años, sino nace de su experiencia. Él de hecho estudió por muchos años textos budistas, estuvo meditando y practicando muy diligentemente, pero estas convicciones a las que llega nacen de experiencia personal, ¿no? Después de sus 30 años de estudio, en realidad sus convicciones y creencias nacen de experiencias.
Yes, so and then he actually experienced, after 30 years of rigorous study, okay, he actually experienced what we humans normally often experience in life. That is, failure and some kind of limitations that we feel within us. Okay? And his experience of this very personal failure, sense of failure and limitations are actually recorded, what he said was, or felt, was recorded in his disciple Bencho's writing. And I have a quote here, so I'm gonna read it. Okay, I'm gonna read the whole thing, okay, here, there, and she's gonna translate later. Okay, here we go. I have realized that I have not attained a single precept in practice of observing precepts, or achieved concentration in jogyo, or attained the right wisdom to eliminate bonno. That bonno is a Japanese word which means causes of one's suffering. Okay? And realize the truth in practice of attaining wisdom, egyo. Furthermore, the mind of the bonpu is easily distracted by things around it like a monkey, and it is indeed scattered everywhere, easily perturbed and unable to concentrate. How could I attain wisdom that removes bonno? How could I sever the fetters created by evil deeds and bonno without the sword of immaculate wisdom? Without severing those fetters, how could I liberate myself from the bondage of transmigration of birth and death?
Bueno, después de 30 años de una práctica muy diligente, Hōnen experimentó lo que muchos de nosotros experimentamos comúnmente a diario, que es el sentido de fracasar y de tener limitaciones personales, ¿no? Y esto que Hōnen experimentó está narrado por uno de sus discípulos. La cita dice así, esto es la experiencia que tuvo Hōnen con sus 30 años, y dice: me he dado cuenta de que no he alcanzado ningún precepto en la práctica de observar los preceptos, ni he conseguido la concentración en la práctica de conseguir la concentración, ni he alcanzado la sabiduría correcta para eliminar klesha o bono, que son las causas del sufrimiento, y darme cuenta de la verdad en la práctica de conseguir la sabiduría. Además, la mente del bonpu se distrae fácilmente por cosas alrededor de él, es como la mente de un mono, y está distraída, está distraída con diferentes cosas, es perturbada fácilmente y es difícil de concentrarse. ¿Cómo es que puedo llegar a la sabiduría que remueve este bono? ¿Cómo me puedo deshacer de los grilletes creados por los malos actos y el bono sin la espada de la sabiduría inmaculada? Sin deshacerme de esos grilletes, ¿cómo me podría liberar de la atadura de la transmigración, del nacimiento y la muerte?
So, when he realized, right, that he himself has this kind of inability, in fact, to achieve even a fraction of the sangaku. Now, sangaku refers to the Buddhist threefold practice, composed of those three things. And also, as he said, his mind is just like a monkey. He's got a monkey mind that is wavering, disconcerted, and easy to be upset. Okay? So that's his mind. So then he said that with the monkey mind, he would not be able to attain good enough wisdom to remove passion and desire that block his liberation, right? After all, he said that I am just a bumper. You know? What can I do? I'm just a bumper. And that's where he ended up being after 30 years of study. I guess nobody wants to be in that position after 30 years.
Y pues bueno, después de 30 años de estar practicando y estudiando mucho, Hōnen se da cuenta de que él mismo es un bonpu, ¿no? Él tiene deseos, tiene la mente de un bonpu que es como la mente de un mono, que se distrae con absolutamente todo y no puede concentrarse en una sola cosa. Entonces, al darse cuenta de que él mismo es un bonpu, él mismo se da cuenta que no es capaz por sí mismo de conseguir la sabiduría para quitarse o deshacerse de las pasiones y los deseos que le impiden liberarse o salvarse.
So, where would you be if you had that kind of thought? Yes, despair. Okay, so he actually fell into this very, very deep depth of despair. And this is what he said, apparently. How sad this is. How sad. What can I do? What can I do? Someone like me does not have what it takes to master the Sangaku, because I've got the monkey mind. I have asked various wise people and visited scholars in order to find other teachings appropriate for my mind and practices feasible for me, but no one could teach or direct me.
Y pues ante esta realización, cuando Hōnen se da cuenta de que él mismo tiene la mente del bonpu, pues se siente desolado y desesperado, ¿no? Dice, ¿cómo puede ser posible? Estoy muy triste, o sea, después de todos estos años, alguien como yo no tenga lo que se necesita para ser un maestro del Sangaku, ¿no? Le he preguntado a mucha gente muy sabia y nadie me ha podido ayudar, entonces pues básicamente yo debo de ser muy, muy tonto porque pues, hasta las mentes no brillantes no me han podido enseñar, ¿no?
But then, what is worse? This is not the end. What is worse, in fact, Hōnen realized, just like any other actually Buddhist at the time, right, that the present state of the world would not help either. Actually, it was widely acknowledged among Buddhists at the time that the current historical period was considered as Mappo, that's a Japanese word, the age of the final degenerate Dharma, when the Buddha's teachings were already too distant and thus became quite difficult to master. So with this actually idea of Mappo, along with his realization that he is just a useless bonpu, he actually truly, sincerely felt this despair and sadness over his own hopeless situations, as well as every other bonpu.
Y peor aún, no solo Hōnen se dio cuenta de que pues, él era un bonpu común y corriente, incapaz de llegar a la iluminación por sí mismo, sino que la época en la que él vivía tampoco le ayudaba en lo absoluto, porque en la época en la que él vivió se creía firmemente que esa época era la época denominada como Mappo, que es la época del Dharma degenerativo. A grandes rasgos, en el budismo se cree que hay como tres épocas, ¿no? Existe el Buda histórico y el Buda como no histórico, digamos, y el Buda histórico existe en un tiempo histórico específico, y cuando ese Buda histórico pues, está vivo, es mucho más fácil alcanzar la salvación porque pues Buda sigue vivo, ¿no? Entonces cuando Buda desaparece, se vuelve cada vez más difícil, entre más se aleja uno cronológicamente de la existencia de este Buda, alcanzar la salvación, ¿no? Entonces la etapa del Mappo es una etapa en la que ya estaban tan distantes de la existencia de este Buda histórico que se creía que era prácticamente imposible llegar a la salvación, ¿no? Entonces esto lo hace sentirse todavía peor, más desesperado y más triste, porque pues no tenía ninguna esperanza de salir de esto.
And this is exactly when Hōnen encountered the idea of the Nenbutsu that were expounded in Zendo's commentary. Actually, he had read Zendo before, but he was now actually psychologically in an appropriate good position, actually to be convinced that the sincere and wholehearted Nenbutsu is the only way of liberation for himself as well as all Bonpu. So this overwhelming despair prepared, in fact, Hōnen psychologically to be able to recognize and sincerely appreciate actually the deep meaning of the Nenbutsu and its aptness as a practice for all humans. That is Bonpu.
Pero Hōnen pronto se dio cuenta de que este estado psicológico al que llegó de desesperación y tristeza, prefirió darse cuenta que pues, no iba a poder llegar a la salvación, fue precisamente lo que lo preparó para darse cuenta de que el Nenbutsu era la práctica adecuada para llegar a la salvación.
So this Hōnen's actually recognition that he was simply Bonpu was not actually merely just a self-deprecating one. Okay? It was a sincere acceptance of himself, I would say, as human. Right? He was just a human. And it is clear from his narrative that reading and understanding the Buddhist texts and practicing did not lead him to that awareness, actually this critical awareness. In fact, the real failure and his agonizing despair over it were necessary, actually, to induce this recognition in Hōnen, which in turn brought him to this absolute faith in the grace of Amida.
Bueno, este Bonpu que Hōnen describe, que es una persona que se da cuenta de sus propias limitaciones, no es un Bonpu totalmente pesimista y autodenigratorio, ¿no? No solo es pensar como de que todo soy, sino es más bien aceptarse a uno mismo como lo que somos, como humanos, ¿no? Completamente humanos y pues con limitaciones. Entonces esta aceptación de sí mismo como humano lo hizo darse cuenta que hay algo externo a él. Si él tiene limitaciones, él no es capaz de hacerlo todo, hay algo externo a él en lo cual debe de tener fe, ¿no? Entonces esto fue un paso necesario para que él llegara a la fe.
So actually, if you read Senchakushu very closely, he doesn't talk about his own psychological actually experience at all. Okay, but this is exactly what is presented as the necessary psychological starting point, or foundation of the proper Nenbutsu practice. And by doing that, according to Hōnen, therefore, knowing the self, that is, knowing one's essential limitations as a Bonpu, actually leads to the complete surrendering of oneself to the grace of Amida. So this complete surrendering is where I think this so-called forgetting the self is in fact happening.
Aunque Hōnen en su obra de Senchakushu no habla acerca de su propia experiencia personal, sí habla de que este estado de desesperación es la condición necesaria para poder rendirse completamente a este otro poder, al poder de aquí.
Okay. Now, so that is the necessary actually starting point, psychological starting point for the Nenbutsu. But actually there are still further, in fact, psychological requirements. So it definitely doesn't sound like Nenbutsu is the easiest, simplest method after all.
Sin embargo, esta condición con la que se inicia el Nenbutsu, ¿no? Esta condición necesaria para poder darse cuenta de las limitaciones propias, pues es un estado difícil, ¿no? Al cual se llega. Entonces parece que no es tan fácil como parecería en un inicio, ¿no?
So there's actually further psychological requirements that Hōnen talks about, is often referred to in Japanese as anjin. Okay, and he also actually mentioned it, of course, talks about, explain in Senchakushu, and he doesn't use the word anjin there, but he uses a different word, which is often translated as 3 kinds of mind. but I personally like actually threefold of mindset. Okay?
Bueno, Hōnen, cuando habla de esta condición psicológica necesaria para poder reconocer las limitaciones propias y poder recitar el Nenbutsu correctamente, pues él habla a mucho detalle de estas condiciones, este estado psicológico al que tiene que llegar uno para poder hacerlo, y se denomina comúnmente como kanji, que bueno, que esta no es la palabra que Hōnen utiliza, que normalmente se traduce como three kinds of mind, 3 tipos de mente, las 3 mentes, ¿no? Y que a la profesora Yumiko le gusta más llamarlo como threefold mind, mente de 3 mentes, no sé.
Okay, so I'm going to skip this quote, I guess. I've been talking about the same thing here, okay? But I think that there is a problem, okay? So Hōnen definitely emphasized this universal accessibility of the Nenbutsu to all, to the monkey mind, right? Those minds are all distracted, very hard to concentrate, okay? And yet, he is definitely talking about several critical psychological conditions for the Nenbutsu to be even properly efficacious, right? So, of course, the important question to ask is, does this idea of psychological requirement actually conflict with Hōnen's emphasis, okay, on this universal accessibility of the Nenbutsu? Why? Because if a proper mindset were required for the proper Nenbutsu, it would not be just enough to simply utter it. Okay? So it sounds like, in fact, it is a very difficult practice after all.
Y pues estas condiciones que Hōnen impone, el anji, las 3 mentes, parece que se contradicen con pues las pretensiones universales e inclusivas de Nenbutsu, ¿no? Que Hōnen tenía, pues porque Hōnen creía que Nenbutsu era la mejor práctica porque era inclusiva para todos, cualquiera la podía practicar. Entonces resulta un poco paradójico que para poder practicar el Nenbutsu correctamente ponga una serie de condiciones psicológicas específicas que parecen muy difíciles de lograr. Entonces la pregunta que hace la doctora Inukai es, entonces esto no se contradice un poco con pues, las pretensiones de universalidad y accesibilidad que creía que Nenbutsu tenía, porque pues si no sería muy fácil simplemente recitar el nombre de vida y pues ya, pero si necesitas tener estas 3 mentes para poder recitarlo correctamente, entonces parece que ya no es tan fácil, ¿no?
Okay, so this is what I think, okay? I think that it doesn't necessarily conflict with his universal accessibility. For one, Hōnen's actually idea of anjin, although they're psychological condition, they actually don't involve any kind of very difficult mental absorption, like sitting meditation or something, nor requires the attainment of some kind of very difficult knowledge of metaphysical truth in Buddhism at all. And also, in fact, the starting point that I talked about earlier, this despair and also recognition of oneself as Bonpu, is very important in this case. So I'm going to talk about threefold mind very briefly later, but it is actually achieved, according to Hōnen, given his own experience, that it is achieved by effectively, not intellectually, effectively infused personal, agonizing personal experiences that are actually quite common to all humans in this earthly life. That is failure, limitations, and feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and helplessness. And these are not something uncommon in our life, Bonpu, okay? And so, in fact, I think that the psychological conditions that Hōnen insists on are not something that you can achieve by studying, but rather, in fact, living human life very honestly, sincerely, and those are actually something that you come to in the end, and that's exactly, I think, that his story of the psychological journey, in fact, represents.
Bueno, a mí me parece que estas 3 mentes que propone Hōnen no no se contradice con la inclusividad del Nenbutsu, porque este estado psicológico de las tres mentes no es un estado mental que absorba mucho como lo es la meditación, ¿no? Sí, y no requiere que lleguemos a verdades absolutas, metafísicas del budismo, ¿no? Sino que más bien no es una mente que se consiga a través del intelecto, sino a través del afecto, ¿no? A través de vivir una vida humana muy honesta, a través de experiencias personales que son comunes para todos nosotros, ¿no? Como fallar, darse cuenta de las limitaciones propias y sentimientos de tristeza, de soledad, de desesperación, etc., ¿no?
Okay, so let me talk very briefly about the threefold mindset. Okay, now the first one is called Shijōshin, that's in Japanese, and often translated as the truly authentic mind. So to have a truly authentic mind, Shijōshin, is for one to be truthful to one's inner state and express it outwardly as it is. In other words, one's outward appearance is in accord with her inner psychological states.
Y bueno, estas tres mentes obviamente tienen tres momentos, ¿no? Son tres mentes, y la primera es la mente verdaderamente auténtica, la Shijōshin, que es básicamente la mente que se expresa a sí misma como lo que es por fuera, ¿no? Es decir, que tu apariencia exterior se corresponde con lo que hay en el interior, y es como la mente más verdadera y pura.
So I think it is quite easy to understand what it is. We don't find a lot of people like this these days in our world, but basically Hōnen is emphasizing the importance of this total correspondence between the internal and outward actually states, internal states and outward behavior. And through this, in fact, what is exhibited is in fact how true we are, the practitioner is, to ourselves, how true to ourselves. And this is the fundamental mental framework required if we are talking about the Nenbutsu in the proper recitation of it. Where proper inner states like beliefs, conviction, true conviction, realizations, intention, all those internal actually things come to be outwardly expressed truthfully with Shijōshin.
Bueno, lo que está mencionando aquí Hōnen es esta correspondencia que es necesaria, esta correspondencia entre los estados internos del individuo y la manera en la que se expresan hacia el exterior, ¿no? Y este es el marco fundamental a partir del cual el Nenbutsu puede ser recitado de manera adecuada.
Okay, so this Shijōshin does not actually provide the practitioner with what to do or what kind of characters to cultivate, okay? Because it is just a mental framework in which we actually maybe do things or cultivate our virtues through which we act. So how to do things is what this, I think, Shijōshin is about. And what we should do and what part are actually specified by Jinshin and I think Ekōhotsuganshin. Those are the two other mental sets.
Bueno, yo creo que esta Shijōshin, esta primera mente, la mente auténtica, no nos dice realmente, no es una mente prescriptiva, no nos dice qué hacer, es una mente, es un estado en el que estamos y ya son las mentes subsecuentes las que nos hablan acerca de qué es lo que hay que hacer.
So now the second one is called Jinshin in Japanese, and it is translated often as mind, the mind of deep faith. Okay. Now this mind has actually two aspects. The first aspect, both aspects I have already talked about, so I'm just going to go through them quickly. Okay. The first aspect is about the self-acceptance of one's own sinfulness, of one's incapability of attaining liberation by one's own effort. That's a realization of oneself as Bonpu. And the second part is unwavering faith in Amida's vows and the power of Amida's vows to bring about the liberation of all Nenbutsu practitioners. Okay? So these are exactly the two actually things that were involved in Hōnen's personal experience and realization already.
Bueno, la segunda mente es la Jinshin, o la mente de la fe profunda, y esta mente tiene dos aspectos principales. Por un lado, tiene la aceptación el reconocimiento de uno mismo como un pecador, ¿no? Que el pecador quizá no lo debemos entender como en el contexto cristiano, sino en el contexto budista, que es darse cuenta que uno no debe ser arrogante, ¿no? Uno no es capaz de hacerlo todo, sino que está limitado y no, el mundo no se acaba en uno mismo, sino que hay otras cosas afuera de uno y hay cosas de las cuales nosotros no somos capaces. Y por otro lado, el segundo aspecto de esta mente es la fe absoluta en Amida, en los votos de Amida, y en el poder de Amida de liberar a todos los practicantes del Nenbutsu.
So these two aspects are not separate, actually. These are intimately, in fact, connected in that the first one, the self-acceptance, is necessary for the second one, actually, to be firmly held. Why? Unless one truly realizes and sincerely accepts the nature of herself as a bunpu, she would still be deluded to think that she has a capacity to achieve liberation by her own effort. And at the moment, even if actually she heard about the Nenbutsu and then she decided to turn to Amida then, okay? Without the first true sincere acceptance, okay, her faith in Amida would not be a wholehearted, unshakable one.
Y bueno, estos dos aspectos de esta segunda mente no están separados, sino que están más bien conectados y dependen mutuamente el uno del otro, porque uno no puede llegar a una fe absoluta y verdadera en Amida si uno no se da cuenta de manera absoluta y verdadera de la limitación que uno mismo tiene, ¿no? Entonces esta humildad de aceptar verdaderamente las limitaciones propias es una condición necesaria para poder llegar a una fe absoluta en los votos de Amida y en el poder de salvación de Amida.
So finally, the third one, it is called the ecológico-comunitario. Actually, if you look it up, English translation of this mind, in fact, already explains the whole thing. So if anybody has a good translation of this short one, I would be really happy to hear about it. Okay, so I'm just gonna go with it. Okay, ecológico-comunitario. Okay, and it is an aspect of the mind in which one brings the purpose of the rebirth in the Jodo, that's Pure Land, to the main focus of her life, not just an Nenbutsu, her life, by dedicating all the merits of her past and present acts, all acts, to it.
Y esta tercera mente, que es la última, se llama ecológico-comunitario, que es, bueno, ese es el nombre en japonés, ha sido traducido de varias maneras en inglés, pero bueno, si alguno de ustedes tiene una traducción buena, les agradecería que me lo hicieran saber, pero vamos a usar la palabra ahorita en japonés por ahora. Y esta tercera mente es un aspecto de la mente en la que uno ya convencido de las limitaciones propias y totalmente teniendo una fe absoluta en el poder de salvación de Amida, uno se dedica por completo a renacer en la tierra pura. Se hace del renacer en la tierra pura la meta principal y la concentración principal de su vida y dedica todos sus esfuerzos y méritos a esa meta.
And actually, it is also the case, it's not just about the merits of the practitioner herself, in fact, acts. It is also the case that even the merits of other people's acts should be seen and taken delightfully within the purpose of the rebirth in the Jodo. So Ekologiko-Comunitario definitely, in fact, goes beyond the recitation of the Nenbutsu and the merit for herself to involve every aspect, actually, of the practitioner's conduct in life.
Y esta tercera mente no solamente hace que las acciones del individuo, del practicante del Nenbutsu, sean las únicas que se dedican a la misión de renacer, sino también las acciones de los demás son organizadas y construidas con el propósito de renacer en el yo.
Okay, so how do these three aspects of the mind interconnect with one another to constitute the psychological condition of the practitioner in the proper recitation of the Nenbutsu? First, the practitioner must reject the possibility, even, of liberating herself by her own power by way of the sincere acknowledgement of her bondness.
Bueno, ¿cómo es que estos tres aspectos, estas tres mentes se conectan entre sí para constituir esta condición psicológica a la que debe de llegar el practicante para recitar el Nenbutsu adecuadamente? Y bueno, la primera es que el practicante debe de rechazar la posibilidad de liberarse a sí mismo, a sí misma a través de su propio poder, ¿no? Y esto lo hace a través de la que es un bombo, una persona con limitaciones y no puede liberarse a sí mismo.
And as a result, she surrenders herself completely to accept the grace of Amida wholeheartedly, which is Jinshin.
Como resultado de esto, la persona se rinde completamente a la gracia de Amida y se rinde absolutamente con todo el corazón, ¿no? O sea, con absoluta fe y convicción.
And then the absolute faith in Amida becomes the stable anchor of her frame of mind, and her life, whole life, comes to be organized and lived for the purpose of the rebirth in the Jodo, which is Ekologiko-Comunitario.
Y esta absoluta fe en Amida se convierte en el ancla alrededor de la cual gira toda su mente y toda su vida se convierte, se organiza y gira en torno a este propósito de vida de renacer en el yo.
And so this whole mental psychological development is to be expressed outwardly in her behavior, most importantly, since we're talking about the Nenbutsu, in the vocal recitation of the Nenbutsu, that is Shijōshin.
Entonces todo este desarrollo psicológico y toda esta actividad mental tiene que ser expresada de manera exterior, específicamente en la práctica de la recitación del Nenbutsu.
So, okay, I hope at this point it is clear that Hōnen's conception of the Nenbutsu is far more complex and in fact intriguing than the common view of the Nenbutsu as an easy, faith-oriented spiritual practice.
Entonces, para ahora seguramente todos ya se habrán dado cuenta de que la concepción que Hōnen tiene del Nenbutsu no es tan simple, ¿no? Sino que es mucho más compleja e intrigante que la manera en que normalmente se piensa acerca del Nenbutsu como una práctica sencilla y que solamente está basada en una fe como sin sentido.
So definitely involves a deep sense of some kind of self here. And now I'm going to make 3 points about this ingenuity of Hōnen here. Now, first point I want to make is, as we have seen already, that reciting the Nenbutsu is an act that is not actually just limited to the vocal utterance of Namu Amida Butsu. That's the Nenbutsu.
Bueno, y lo que quiero explicar ahora es que la recitación del Nenbutsu es un acto que no se limita solamente a la recitación vocal del Nenbutsu, ¿no? Del nombre de Namu que es lo que se recita.
Right, so I'm going to skip the next 2 things because I talked about this already, about this self-realization and also this the feeling of despair, right? Those are quite critical in this psychological journey. So in the end, reciting the Nenbutsu, in fact, is this very dynamic, emotionally infused process in which the practitioner transforms herself from being a bonpu first to being a actually spiritually quite grounded person.
Y bueno, esta práctica del Nenbutsu al final resulta ser una práctica muy dinámica, guiada por las emociones, guiada por las emociones, en el que el practicante se transforma a sí misma como de un ser bonpu, que se reconoce como bonpu, a un ser que está anclado espiritualmente, como una persona espiritualmente.
And the second point is that the efficacy of the Nenbutsu reaches beyond the realm of spirituality in Hōnen's understanding of it.
Y el segundo punto es que la eficacia del Nenbutsu va más allá del área de la espiritualidad, desde la manera en la que Hōnen lo entiende.
Okay, so this anjin, right, or this threefold mind, encompasses the practitioner's mindset not only in the act of reciting the Nenbutsu, but in any act, behavioral, verbal, and even mental, intentional.
Bueno, esta anjin, estas tres mentes, no solamente las usa el practicante cuando está practicando Nenbutsu, sino que es algo que se transfiere es un estado mental que se transfiere a todas las acciones del individuo, no solamente en su práctica.
So through this actually a very humbling experience of self-realization and also surrendering oneself to the Amida and reorganizing one's own life, okay, through those three minds, okay. In fact, what happens in the end is exactly the very deep ethical even transformation of oneself. And so if the practitioner starts to live life according to this threefold mind, then that life would be totally just this ethical, unselfish life.
Y bueno, en general lo que esto significa para el individuo es una transformación ética, ¿no? Una transformación completamente ética en la que el individuo se da cuenta de sus limitaciones y adquiere una humildad, una fe absoluta que hace que tenga un estado mental que se transfiere a todas las acciones que realiza y lo llevan a vivir una vida completamente, bueno, no egoísta.
And finally, Hōnen conceives the act of reciting the Nenbutsu, I don't think I talked about this earlier, as building actually a direct personal connection with Amida.
Y Hōnen entiende este acto de recitación del Nenbutsu como un acto que construye una relación directa y personal con Amida.
So actually in chapter 7 of the Senchakushu, Hōnen explained by quoting a passage from Zendo that the practitioner comes to be embraced by Amida's light in the present life by establishing various karmic relations with Amida by reciting the Nenbutsu.
Bueno, Hōnen explica que en el Senchakushu explica que el practicante es abrazado, es incluido dentro de la luz de Amida en la vida presente al establecer relaciones kármicas con Amida a través de la práctica de recitar el Nenbutsu.
So what meaning does it have, of course, to be embraced by Amida's light? Well, he doesn't explain much, but this is the quote that he took from the Sutra of Immeasurable Life. Okay? So that sutra says about this being embraced by Amida. Those who are embraced by the light of Amida in this world eliminate their greed, anger, and ignorance, become flexible, both physically, whatever that means, and mentally, leap for joy and happiness, and develop the good heart in this life.
Y bueno, una pregunta que surge es, ¿qué significa exactamente ser acogido por esta luz de Avena, ¿no? Y en el Sutra de la Vida Infinita, el Muyo dice, aquellos que son acogidos por la luz de Avena en este mundo eliminan su ambición, su odio, su ignorancia, se convierten en personas flexibles, tanto física como mentalmente, buscan la felicidad y la dicha y desarrollan un buen corazón.
So, actually, so being embraced by Amida's light, right? The practitioner loses, in fact, the essential negative aspects of being a bonpu, that is greed, anger, ignorance. Okay, that is actually what bonno is about. So bonno is greed, anger, and ignorance, which in fact block our liberation. Okay, which is actually the same thing to say that the practitioner then lose her actually bompness.
Entonces, básicamente, el ser acogido por esta luz de vida significa que el individuo se deshace de su pompuridad, de estas cualidades que lo hacen un ser ordinario capaz de concentrarse y demás, pues pierde esta cualidad, estas características que habíamos llamado el bono, propias del pompu, ¿no? Entonces, sí, pierde su pompuridad.
So actually, he makes these points in passing in the Senjakshu, but he's making actually a huge point here, because he's actually basically saying that by way of reciting the Nenbutsu with the Anjin, threefold mind, the practitioner indeed transformed herself from being a bonpu to a being without bonno. A being without bonno is not a bonpu, which means that you are not an ordinary person anymore, whatever that means.
Y bueno, esto Hōnen lo dice medio de pasada en el Senjakshu, pero es muy importante lo que dice, porque él mismo dice que al alcanzar esto, uno está perdiendo sus cualidades de bono, ¿no? Y pues esto significa que la persona deja de ser un bonpu, entonces eso quiere decir que ya no eres una persona ordinaria, ¿no? Ya dejaste de ser una persona ordinaria, lo que sea que eso signifique.
So, I want to conclude here, okay, and by talking about this genius of Hōnen, okay. So, when the Nenbutsu is done properly, as Hōnen sees it, it is actually a culmination of the practitioner's journey of self-discovery and self-transformation, in fact, although, in fact, Hōnen does not explicitly say so. By the way, whatever I said about the psychological journey and all those things, Hōnen does not actually say these things explicitly, but they are all, as far as I can tell, implied, I believe, by him.
Entonces a mí me interesa hablar acerca de la genialidad de Hōnen, ¿no? Con esta idea que planteas, ¿no? Y que es básicamente que cuando el Nenbutsu es recitado adecuadamente, es la culminación del camino del practicante, del autodescubrimiento y la autotransformación. Cabe recalcar que Hōnen no dice nada de esto explícitamente, incluso lo que mencioné acerca del estado psicológico que busca llegar, tampoco Hōnen lo dice explícitamente, sin embargo creo que se implica por lo que lo dice.
So the superiority of Nenbutsu to other Buddhist practices does not consist merely in its easiness, but according to me, actually, I'm arguing, and Hōnen, I believe, has that idea. But more importantly, is a practice actually accessible to all people, by which we, even bonpu, can still eliminate the bonpuness that bind us to this corrupt world without rigorously striving to do so. And this is exactly, I believe, the genius of Hōnen lies.
Y bueno, yo creo que la genialidad de Hōnen reside precisamente en el hecho de que el Nenbutsu es superior a otros no solamente porque sea la práctica más sencilla y accesible, sino porque es una práctica accesible para todos, porque como juntos somos capaces, a través del Nenbutsu, de eliminar nuestra boncuidad, la cual es lo único que nos vincula a este mundo corrupto, y lo podemos hacer sin tener que tener un gran rigor.
Okay, so to me, what is really particularly interesting in Hōnen is that the self, okay, that he talks about and he found, the discovery of that is an indispensable stage in this transformative journey of oneself, is a being with limitations, ignorance, and emotion. That is what it is to be human. Not what we really are or what we are ultimately not, metaphysically speaking. The self that we have to discover and in the end surrender to the grace of Amida is just ourselves, what it is to be us, just human, ordinary human.
Y bueno, a mí me resulta particularmente interesante que este autodescubrimiento del sí mismo sea una etapa tan indispensable en este camino transformativo del sí mismo, ¿no? Dentro de la perspectiva de Hōnen, de darnos cuenta que somos un ser con limitaciones, que somos ignorantes, que tenemos emociones y pues básicamente esto es describirnos o reconocernos a nosotros mismos como lo que somos, que es ser humanos. O sea, ser humanos y no lo que realmente somos o lo que en realidad no somos, ¿no? En un sentido metafísico. Entonces, esta idea de autoconocimiento, de conocerse a sí mismo como Bonku, lleva al practicante a entender verdaderamente por qué es que debe de tener absoluta fe en Amida, en la gracia de Amida, y cómo el Nenbutsu es la práctica seleccionada por Amida para llegar a la iluminación.
So I want to end with this quote that he had in the last chapter of the Senchakushu. Actually, just as Dogen, this Zen monk, uses the metaphor. He uses the metaphor, Dogen, not Hōnen. Dogen uses the metaphor of the reflection of the moon in water to refer to the attainment of enlightenment in Genjo Koan. Okay? Hōnen also uses a similar, in fact, metaphor and end the Senchakushu by saying this. He said, the Nenbutsu practice can be compared to the reflection of the moon in water. It freely rises up to the moon, or the moon shines down on the water.
Dogen en su obra Genjo Koan, así como Hōnen, los dos usan la misma tipo de metáfora acerca del reflejo que la luna tiene en el agua para describir llegar a la iluminación, ¿no? Y dice así, esta metáfora. La práctica del Nenbutsu puede ser comparada al reflejo de la luna en el agua. Por un lado, el agua botea hacia la luna o la luna se ilumina hacia abajo en el agua, ¿no? Se refleja en el agua.
So through the Nenbutsu, Amida and the practitioner I come together.
Y es a través del Nenbutsu que Amida y el practicante se unen.
Thank you.
I have a question about Hōnen. My understanding of Hōnen's starting point as the preacher of Nenbutsu path was not so much based on his own recognition of ignorance and helplessness and hopelessness as his desire to save other people. And my understanding was that Hōnen was quite advanced in his religious path, but he felt not so good about people not able to have share in that in some way. And so he engaged in debates like Ohara and so on, and he was already proving to the world that he was a master of Mahayana Buddhist teaching. And somehow from there he took the path of like a compassion to save others. It's like a bodhisattva path. That was my understanding, but you depicted a very different kind of Hōnen, so I'm wondering if I was completely misled in creating my own impression of Hōnen. And also I'd like to know the name of the disciple who kept these words of Hōnen.
Bueno, lo que ella le interesa es lo que le llamó la atención es la manera en la que retrata un poco la presentación de la doctora Inukai a Hōnen, ¿no? Porque ella considera que Hōnen no estaba tan concentrado en estos sentimientos, en este estado de desesperación, de desolación, sino que lo que más le interesaba era salvar a otras personas a través de todo esto. Y lo que más le preocupaba acerca de las prácticas que tenían en el budismo era que la gente no tenía acceso a estas prácticas muchas veces, no tenían acceso a la salvación. Y pues, repito, lo que le importaba era salvar a otros, ¿no? Y a la doctora ella quiere saber acerca de quién es este discípulo de Hōnen que documentó cómo se sentía Hōnen, ¿no? Que comenzaron la doctora en su presentación.
So let me answer the easier question. Disciple's name is Bencho. Bencho.
Could you spell it?
Oh, you mean B-E-N-C-H-O?
Bencho.
Bencho.
What kind of
Bencho is 長いかな。長い。弁はなんていうの、無に。ね、弁長の弁はこう弁。
弁償の弁？
弁償の
弁償の弁？
弁償の弁護士。
あ、そう、弁護士の弁。
弁護士の弁。
そう。That. Sorry about that.
Where is it found? This particular document.
I actually got the quote from. Hold on a second. Jōdōshū Seiten. Yeah. So it is actually these two passages that I quoted, where, right, Hōnen talks about his failure to master the Sangaku, and also he said that, oh, I'm sad. Okay, both appears in the same work, actually, both of them, and. In fact, originally my attention was drawn to it by reading some other Japanese secondary literature. Okay, and that's how I encountered this records.
That's a proper depiction of Hōnen as opposed to more like a traditional.
Okay, let me answer the first question, right? Right. So because I can understand why that you see the conflict between the way I was presenting. Hōnen and this more common understanding or view of Hōnen. Okay, I agree with you that Hōnen was definitely quite knowledgeable, very rational, and he liked to engage with a lot of debates. Okay, so he was definitely. There was actually a term now that I completely forgot. There was a term actually that his other monks used to refer to Hōnen. Meaning how knowledgeable and almost sometimes aggressive in debating. Not aggressive in the sense of too aggressive, but he did not shy away from debating, right? So that's exactly what he was like, because when he was really studying seriously, and he was also mastering a lot of teachings and scriptures of Buddhism, I mean, okay? But then, I don't want to say that Hōnen was such a compassionate person also at the same time, okay? But at least this is another quote that I did not read, okay? And from the same Bencho's okay, writing that when he actually fell into this despair where he recognized how helpless and hopeless he was in fact acquiring this wisdom, right, to sever all fetters. He still did not, of course, give up. Okay, and so this is what is actually recorded. In the meantime, I enter the repository of Buddhist texts in despair and study the sutras in grief. Okay, and this is when he found Zendo's commentary. Okay, or at least he encountered it again. Okay, now. He does not actually talk about his own psychological states and journey as the ground for his conviction, actually. But my argument here, okay, is that the strength and power of Hōnen's conviction is not just coming from his intellectual mastery of Buddhist texts, okay? But rather, there is this very deeply personally grounded conviction there. Okay? And that I thought, and I argued, would make Hōnen actually even more interesting.
Bueno, la doctora ya bastante expresó que le preguntaba a la doctora Inukai si esa manera en la que retrata a Hōnen a lo largo de su presentación, como su experiencia, lo que sea compasivo, no es la manera tradicional en la que se trata a Hōnen, y la doctora Inukai explica que sí, efectivamente Hōnen de hecho es una persona que se involucraba mucho en los debates y era agresivo, no en un sentido violento, sino simplemente que no le era muy bueno debatiendo y le gustaba hacerlo y lo hacía con gran ímpetu. Sin embargo, hay una parte que no leyó la doctora Inukai, que es la frase de cuando Hōnen se da cuenta de su propia profundidad. Dice, mientras tanto, adentré en los textos budistas desesperado y estudié los sutras con gran dolor, ¿no? Y esto sucede cuando Hōnen se enfrenta al comentario del Zendo, y lo que quiere enfatizar la doctora Inukai es que los estados psicológicos de Hōnen, o sea, todo lo que pasó, lo que sufrió, lo que sea, no eran la base de sus convicciones. Sin embargo, lo que le interesa es que lo que le parece interesante es que las convicciones de Hōnen no venían solamente de una base intelectual, sino también de lo personal y lo afectivo, ¿no? Y eso es lo que a la doctora Inukai le parece especialmente interesante de Hōnen. Lo hace más interesante.
Thank you. Is this microphone working? Okay. Thanks so much for this very fascinating talk. I have 4 questions, but they're short.
4?
4. Very short questions. So, first, you began talking about the psychological preconditions for the proper practice of Nenbutsu. And perhaps the preconditions for the right understanding. Now, you titled your talk Selection and Justification. Now, I understand justification, at least I'm taking it for granted that you're thinking of an epistemological concept of justification. Okay, so first, I'm not questioning that. I want to ask though whether in any non-Asian epistemology have you ever found a psychological precondition for, say, knowing the truth of something? That's the first question. Second, similar. You went on, before you went into the details of the 3 mindsets, you spoke generally about the precondition of knowing my limitations, and that leading to the complete surrender of my willful self. Have you ever come across in non-Asian epistemologies anything like a kind of knowing which results or issues into surrender of oneself. The third question, and in Hōnen, I'm wondering whether these preconditions, the proper mindset, the three different kinds of mind, are really a precondition, or is it possible that the mindset in general is something that is achieved gradually through practice? And fourth, this is what I think that might be the case. At least one of the mindsets, the third one, the ecológico-comunitario, is whereby the practitioner or the person has to rearrange her whole life. That sounds like something that takes effort. Sounds like something that involves striving. If so, it would seem to contradict the view that liberation is possible only by complete abandoning one's own power. So it looks like either we have a precondition that requires effort and striving, or the practice itself is so transformative. You mentioned that at the end. It is so transformative that these are not preconditions at all, but continually conditioning.
La primera, el doctor tiene tres preguntas. La primera es respecto, tiene que ver un poco con el título de la presentación, que la presentación es selección y justificación del Nenbutsu en Hōnen, ¿no? Lo que el doctor Marco quiere preguntar es un poco acerca de la palabra de justificación, ¿no? Que él asume que la doctora Inukai se está refiriendo a, está hablando en términos epistemológicos, ¿no? De justificación, y la doctora Inukai dijo que sí, entonces, la pregunta del doctor Ronaldo hacia la doctora Inukai es si ella personalmente se ha encontrado con tradiciones no asiáticas que tengan, que impliquen una precondición para que el sujeto pueda empezar a conocerlo, que es la precondición de las tres mentes. La segunda pregunta tiene que ver un poco también con esto, ¿no? Pregunta si la doctora Inukai se ha encontrado personalmente con epistemologías no asiáticas que demanden esta transformación del sujeto, ¿no? Esta renuncia a sí mismo del sujeto que se tiene que atravesar para alcanzar las tres mentes. Y la tercera pregunta es, bueno, el doctor Calderón nota que estas tres preguntas, si las tres mentes son en realidad una precondición o es más bien algo que se alcanza gradualmente. Y esto lo pregunta porque le parece que la tercera mente implica mucho trabajo, porque implica que el sujeto reorganice todo en su vida, ¿no? Para dedicarlo a esta vida y a renacer en el yodo. Entonces esto parece contradecir la idea de que es algo fácil de lograr a través de abandonarse a sí mismo, de rendirse a sí mismo a la clase de vida, ¿no? Entonces se pregunta si no es más bien algo, estas tres mentes, si no es algo más bien que se alcanza gradualmente, ¿no?
Okay, I try to answer all of them as briefly as I can, and maybe we can talk about this later too. The first question about the psychological condition as grounds, justificatory grounds, right? In West, no, I can't think of anything. I would think that would be a really bad, perhaps, the psychological. If you use some kind of psychological condition as the epistemological justificatory ground, then that could actually, I would think, lead to something that is called a psychologism or something. So it would be probably a really bad idea to find any normativity in psychological condition for any epistemic state. Okay, so for that reason, that might have been criticized by some Western philosophers, but I cannot think of anybody. Even Hume wouldn't probably go that far. Now, I didn't mean to say that Hōnen's actually Hōnen was saying that I didn't actually, maybe it came out that way. I didn't mean to say that preconditions are actually foundational ground as for justification of the Nenbutsu. For Hōnen, what I meant was that his psychological discovery or transformation, some kind of conversion experience that he had when he encountered the Zendo commentary in his Disappear was the ground for the strength of his conviction, actually, very personal conviction that Nenbutsu would be the only possible practice available to him. Okay? And that I don't mean as justification of the Nenbutsu, but at least that would actually amount to his reason for selecting Nenbutsu as the only practice. Now, second one, knowing oneself as this hopeless, helpless being would lead to the complete surrendering of oneself. Have I found this in Western philosophy? No, I am not too familiar with medieval, and I read the Confession of the St. Augustine when I was a graduate student, so I don't remember exactly how St. Augustine was talking about his spiritual journey. My God is there might possibly be a similar type of transformative conversion type of journey that St. Augustine might have gone through. I'm not sure, actually. But at least I do have a piece that I wrote a long time ago where I actually make a comparison between William James' account that he gave in the book called The Varieties of Religious Experience and Hōnen. And James actually goes through many different transformative conversion experiences. And he, in fact, talks about this surrendering of oneself as a lot of times part of the similar type of transformative conversion experience that I was attributing to Hōnen. That's just, I'm done. No, and there are two more questions.
Bueno, respecto a las primeras dos preguntas, no, dice la doctora Inukai que ya no ha encontrado en la tradición epistemológica occidental esta idea de que haya una precondición psicológica para poder conocer o algo así, ¿no? Ella, cuando se usó la palabra precondición, no se refería a las bases que justificaban algo, ¿no? Y a ella solamente le interesa esto en el sentido de que esta precondición, este estado de desesperación al que llegó Hōnen, eran lo que forjaron su fuerza y su convicción, ¿no? Y respecto a la segunda pregunta, tampoco ha encontrado nada en la tradición occidental en realidad que hable acerca de conocerse a uno mismo como un ser humano sin esperanzas de conocer la verdad, ¿no? De ser incapaz. Lo único que dice que recuerda un poco, pero pues no es experta en el tema, obviamente, acerca del camino que siguió San Agustín, sus confesiones, el camino del arrepentimiento y demás, pero bueno, no lo recuerdo perfectamente. Pero menciona un texto que escribió hace ya bastante tiempo acerca de William James y de lo que él habla acerca de la renuncia que uno tiene que hacer ante uno mismo, y ella se referiría un poco a esto que James menciona, como lo compararía más bien con lo que acaba de mencionar acerca de lo que dijo Hōnen.
Now, the third and fourth questions are related, so hopefully what I'm going to say would answer both of them. You're absolutely right, actually, that not all of the conditions that I talk about and ascribe into to Hōnen are pre-condition. according to myself, as I see it, actually this sincere acceptance, recognition of oneself as a bonpu, and then that actually put the practitioner into this deep depth of hopelessness and helplessness. I like to actually think of that as precondition in a way, in the sense that that actually psychological position of the practitioner is exactly what the practitioner moves to the practice of Nenbutsu. Okay? So in that sense, I think that that's really required precondition, in the sense that we can't just listen to some talk about the Nenbutsu and say that, oh, that sounds good, easy, that's an easy devotional spiritual practice, I'm going to actually adopt it. And that's not the way to get in there anyway. I think that there has to be some, in order for the Nenbutsu in the end to become worthwhile and properly efficacious, Nenbutsu practitioner must start this journey with that sincere acceptance. So that I would call condition, I might say. Now the rest of the three minds. Okay, so the should I stop here? Yeah, I'm going to stop here.
Y bueno, la pregunta 3 y la 4 están relacionadas, entonces las voy a responder un poco juntas, ¿no? Y bueno, la técnica está de acuerdo con lo que mencionas del doctor Mario, ¿no? Que no todas las condiciones son acerca de lo que son precondiciones, ¿no? Este estado de ser el individuo que está desesperado y desolado, son unas condiciones psicológicas, pero son importantes justamente porque son las condiciones que mueven al practicante y le dan su convicción, ¿no? Lo dotan de esta convicción, porque pues esta convicción no nace de estudiar los textos, sino de alguna manera ser movidos por una experiencia real. Y solo a partir de este tipo de experiencias reales nace como esta convicción sincera de aceptarse a sí mismo como un poco.
Okay. Now, if we look at actually the threefold mindset, right? The three kinds of mind. This self-acceptance is part of Jinshin. Okay. So that is part of it. Okay. But then the rest of it, you're right, that as I actually tried to depict this as transformative journey, already this actually term transformative journey already indicates, right, that this reciting of Nenbutsu, eventually being able to recite it properly, is a journey. It includes some temporal duration where the practitioner would have to be able to start to develop and cultivate a particular mindset. Okay? So definitely I would not want to actually consider them as precondition, but rather once actually practitioner starts to recite, brings herself, to start to trust and have faith in Amida's vow, because she realized that she was just a bonpu and completely incapable of doing anything on her own. Okay? I think that she would start to recite the Nenbutsu with that thought in mind, and as she practices the Nenbutsu, I'm sure that the faith would be deeper, okay, and also at the same time, some other mindset would probably developed. However, I'm not sure, but this truly authentic mind, that is to be true to oneself, and so. And also the third one, eko-hatsuganshin, as you said, that this looks like that it involves a lot of effort on the part of the practitioner to try to rebuild and reorganize one's life for the purpose of rebirth in Jodo. Okay? It seems like that way, but I am not sure actually that psychologically, if you get into this mode where you start to, in fact, recite Nenbutsu, okay, with this sincere hope and hope for rebirth in Jodo, and understanding, strong, very firm understanding of Amida's vow, and starting to have a stronger and deeper faith in it, in his vow, and also grace. Okay, somehow it gives the practitioner almost like opportunity to, without making explicit effort, to change her own mindset. Okay, the practitioner would start to transform herself mentally in the way that also Hōnen is talking about, and my gut is that would probably what Hōnen had in mind, really, because I think probably that is exactly the power of the Nenbutsu in Hōnen's mind.
Bueno, respecto a la pregunta de las tres mentes, de una precondición o algo que se ha alcanzado gradualmente, sí, podemos hablar, más que hablar de una precondición, probablemente es algo que se alcanza gradualmente, precisamente por el hecho de que, pues como ya habló la doctora Inukai en su charla, es una travesía, un camino, una travesía la que atraviesa el sujeto de arrepentimiento y demás, ¿no? Entonces eso implica un proceso transformativo y por tanto sería, esas tres mentes sí serían algo que se alcanza gradualmente, ¿no? A través de un proceso. Lo mismo pasa con el caso de la primera mente, que es pues que demanda que el Nenbutsu no se repite solamente, bueno, no necesariamente una vez, sino que se repita una y otra vez, ¿no? Entonces, a través de repetirlo constantemente, parece que pasa algo en el sujeto, en la persona que lo recita, que se transforma, ¿no? Y por otro lado, en cuanto a la tercera mente, el doctor Marno menciona que se le hace un poco contradictorio, que pues parece más difícil de lo que en realidad es. La doctora Inukai menciona que en realidad no es tan difícil porque simplemente presupone la absoluta convicción y sincera convicción del sujeto, que no demanda una verdadera agencia del sujeto, ¿no? Simplemente es un rendirse por completo y dedicar todas sus energías a renacer, pero de una manera que no necesita, que no demanda de un esfuerzo explícito, ¿no? Para alcanzarlo.
Bueno, yo nomás quería comentar algo, que sería muy interesante que la doctora Yumiko leyera a Tanabe, porque él tiene una interpretación de las tres mentes y a él le parece, él se cuestiona en primer lugar porque la primera mente es la mente sincera o la mente auténtica, ¿no? Porque si fuera la primera mente, la mente auténtica, entonces ¿por qué tendría que existir la experiencia del arrepentimiento o de la incapacidad de nosotros mismos para obtener la liberación, ¿no? Entonces, él pone a la mente auténtica como una mente gozne, in between, entre la mente profunda y la mente de transferencia, que es la tercera mente, la mente de transferencia de los méritos para el nacimiento en la tierra pura. Y él ve que entre las tres mentes hay una transformación temporal, ¿no? Entonces, la mente sincera, que es una mente que está en medio, es la mente que, practicándose continuamente, es la mente que justamente nos está liberando del pasado, o sea, esta mente de aceptar nuestra propia inhabilidad continuamente y la que está justamente abriendo al futuro, en términos de que esta mente de transferencia de nuestros propios actos a la tierra pura nos transforma en medios en medios para la salvación de los otros, ¿no? Entonces, tienen una articulación temporal. La respuesta que tiene Shinran con respecto al planteamiento de Hōnen es que Shinran lo que dice es que esta mente profunda y esta entrega absoluta a la vida es algo que viene de Amida mismo. No proviene de una condición del sujeto, sino proviene de Amida. Entonces, en ese sentido, cuando se piensa en condiciones epistemológicas o condiciones subjetivas, pues lo que haría Shinran es romper esa condición, sino que sería que proviene del amor infinito de la vida.
Thank you. Very illuminating and clear talk. I have two things to say. First is need to confession. First, you say philosopher will run to the door and often overlook the significance of Hōnen. That me too. I should change my mind from today. Thank you. And second is a question that you should already be fed up with. That is a question, Shinran versus Hōnen. Because Shinran is still much popular than Hōnen in its philosophical popularity and religious demography in Japan. That is one of the reasons why Hōnen's importance is so easily overlooked. And I know that is a very big question, so let me try to answer this question on behalf of you, so you can correct me or make some comment to me. And so Hōnen's key word is bonpu, right? Ordinary human beings, and bonpu still can be saved. Okay, Shinran. More dramatic. Shinran's key word is acne behind. And acne behind can have a better chance to be saved. And also Shinran called himself a gutoku, foolish, boring, middle-aged guy. And so everything goes deeper and existentially dramatized than Hōnen. And so many people's shallow mind have been so Shinran for existentially deeper than Hōnen. So but let me say something on behalf of Hōnen. So the important thing is the vulnerability of ourselves, of Hōnen. And what vulnerability? One is incapacity. That's okay still. Lack of capacity. It's very shallow. But important, very important part of vulnerability is a sinfulness. You mentioned in the Shinjin part. That is turned out to be behind. Right? So Hōnen said almost the same thing with Shinran. So what's the difference? Just rhetorical. So philosophically, both are on the same level, very deep existential level. So the difference is just rhetorical. That is my answer on how do you, maybe you can correct it. And third is our self, or self-journey. So let me rephrase your story like this. So from vulnerable self to new self. And this new self is twin self. Vulnerable self is just part of the story, not whole. The other, pole end is great mercy amida. So self is now become a twin. So my individual vulnerable self, just one end of whole story. The other end is amida. So this is a new look to self. Is right or wrong? So there is then the next question. As you mentioned, there should be some parallelness between Hōnen's idea and St. Augustine or other Christian story of revelations. So what's the difference? That question.
What's the difference?
Right. It's very difficult and deep question. The relation between the Hōnen's pure Buddhism and Christianity. I know this is a very difficult question. So here's my one key. And the God and great mercies Buddha, still there's big difference between them. In my view, God has a power to intervene in this world causally. God created this world causally. And sometimes intervene in this world by making miracles. So maybe God saved us by some causal intervention, some miraculous way. But Amida didn't do that, maybe couldn't do it. So Amida has only intentional liberation in this world, being great mercies, being care of us very deeply, but don't want to intervene in this world causally. So that's a quite big difference between Amida and God. That difference should be severely reflected to the other side of the story. That's my just.
Well, thank you. I have nothing to correct. Oh, should I? Do you want to? Oh, sorry.
No, la verdad lo voy a traducir un poco más, pero bueno, la primera cuestión era acerca bueno, al principio la doctora Inukai dijo que ella no iba a tratar de diferenciar tratar de entender por qué Hōnen era un poco más relegado que otros actores, ¿no? Pero bueno, básicamente el doctor Uchi da una pista, lo que él cree que es la respuesta es quizá la diferencia de conceptos claves que cada uno maneja, ¿no? En el caso de Hōnen, el concepto de rumbo es el concepto central, en el caso de Shinra, el concepto central es Agni. Bueno, creo que esta diferencia de los conceptos es como lo que hace que quizá uno se le haya dado más importancia que el otro. Y respecto a la segunda parte, es una pregunta muy difícil acerca de le pide como una respuesta de diferenciar esta idea de la salvación de Amida con la salvación que existe dentro del cristianismo, ¿no? Y él se responde un poco a sí mismo para ver si la doctrina está de acuerdo, que sí está, que básicamente la diferencia fundamental es que tanto Jesús como Amida quieren salvar a la humanidad, pero Amida se queda en la intención y en el deseo de salvarnos, pero no desea intervenir en el mundo para de hecho salvarlo, ¿no? No es como Jesús o el Dios cristiano que viene al mundo e interviene a través de los milagros y demás, ¿no? Sino que es un Dios que está ahí, que quiere salvarnos, pero no interviene directamente en el mundo.
En la práctica del Nenbutsu, los tres estados de la mesa de clase de mente se van siguiendo en la práctica como pasos o son indistintas llegar a cada estado. Y bueno, esto es como una derrota, una aceptación y una entrega. It's like it's an easy question. Is if the practice of Nenbutsu you can make the three mind states, the three kind of minds, like steps or both, each one together. Could be like defeat, accept, and surrender.
That's not an easy question. It's a wonderful, wonderful question. It actually relates to this second step and steps that Rebecca was talking about too. So it was a wonderful question. And it also relates to, I think, John's third and fourth questions, actually, too. Okay, and I think, right, that as I said earlier, that a particular psychological condition must be in place. Okay, in that case, that I call the precondition. So there is a step, in a way, there, the pre-step that the practitioner had to take. Now, the three minds, right, Jinshin and all those things, is it that you go from one mind to the next and next, one after another in time. I don't think so. Okay, Hōnen doesn't talk about it, actually, how exactly these three aspects of the mind interconnect with each other in the practitioner's practice of the Nenbutsu much. But I think that the sincerity, being truthful to oneself, right, and also the depth of one's faith in Amida, and this reorganizing, thinking of the merits of one's act for the purpose of the rebirth in Jodo, all of them, I think, all those minds, as one practices the Nenbutsu, actually get deeper and deeper and deeper together, actually. Right. Right, so I don't think that, so the way you are absolutely right that I'm going to make changes to my paper, I shouldn't have said, right, the first this happens, and second that happens, and third that happens. I definitely put it that way, and you caught me. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Bueno, respondiendo rápidamente, básicamente pregunta si el Nenbutsu es una práctica que se hace como por pasos, ¿no? De manera secuencial, y el doctor Inukai responde que efectivamente es una práctica que no es tan claro, ¿no? Es como lo que mencionaba la doctora Revuelta, no termina una etapa y la siguiente y después la siguiente, ¿no? Sino que es algo que es una práctica que entre más se practica, más interconectada está un paso por el otro. Es más como una distinción lógica, no una verdadera distinción como de pasos dentro de un proceso, ¿no? Entonces ella menciona que va a corregir su paper al respecto, y qué bueno que salió esta relación.
Thank you.
When you talk about all these,
Oh, 3 things?
The mindset.
Oh, steps?
And I was thinking they were like, there was like a relationship. I don't know. That's what I'm going to ask. And is it viable to compare these philosophies with the existentialism or something like that? You know, with the Western existentialism, I don't know, like Kierkegaard or something like that, because he has like this idea of 3 stages, with the aesthetic, the ethic, and the last one that is relation. And it's like the self, and you can separate with them, but you don't separate at all. It's like something really weird, and I don't know, I was thinking of that.
La chica pregunta acerca de las 3, que si las 2 encontrarían similitudes entre estas 3 mentes y las 3 etapas que Kierkegaard menciona, ¿no?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the question, and actually, I take it as a comment and suggestion for me, that is to look into Kierkegaard too. Again, I'm going to confess that I was an undergraduate student when I read, I think, Kierkegaard's, I forgot which one, where he talks about those things. And, well, I can see definitely, probably, the big, huge possibility, as you said, right? The similarity or some affinity. Right. And this relates probably to what Deguchi Sensei was also saying about this, right? The journey of human, okay, spiritually, right? And whether there's any kind of similarity or differences between this Hōnen's journey, conversion or spiritual journey, and Christian. You know, that's what Kierkegaard was talking about. So I think, well, I have no ground for thinking this. So should I say I believe? I don't believe it because I don't know it. But I really think that there's something there, right? Especially Kierkegaard, yes. Yes, maybe somebody else could help, and maybe, yeah, thank you so much. Maybe, yeah, you can.
Bueno, yo pienso que has tenido una gran intuición, porque precisamente lo que hace Tanabe es darse cuenta que entre los votos 17, 18 y 19 del Sutra de la Luz Infinita hay una relación entre el estado estético, el estado ético y el estado religioso. O sea, el estado ético es la inmediatez, ¿no? Entonces, justamente, esa idea de la inmediatez se rompe completamente, ¿no? Entonces, el estado ético justamente es toda esta idea de ser medio, ¿no? Pero también al mismo tiempo, es que todo esto viene de la pirámide, ¿no? Es decir, ese es el estado religioso.
Y es justo al final, pero uno nunca nota cuando se rompe, como la doctora dijo, ¿no? Que se conjunta todo.
Ajá.
No lo nota.
Pero sí, o sea, si es que es que lo entiende como un proceso que es como, uno saca uno, luego regresa.
First of all, Inukai-sama, thank you for your presentation, for sharing your knowledge with all of us, and we really know. I learned this very. And I have 3 questions. There are
3.
3, but
Man, you guys have multiple questions.
First one is, are you a practitioner of Buddhism?
No. That was quick.
Practica budismo.
Is Hōnen practiced currently in Japan? Maybe you know that. Maybe not.
You mean Jodo?
Hōnen.
Yes.
Yes. And so, where in Japan?
Where?
Yeah. You don't specifically.
All over.
All
All over Japan.
Yeah. Great.
There are a lot of Jodo temples. Head temple. Where, in Kyoto? What was that, right? And a lot of them.
Okay, well, maybe the last one is the most interesting one. From your personal perspective,
Kyoin, right.
from your personal perspective, are we reaching Mako period?
Mako? We are still in it.
My personal. You mean personally? Oh yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, sure. Corrupt world. I'm not sure it's, I'm not sure it is because that we are so distant from Buddha's teaching or anything. But at least, to say, if you ask me, do you think that this world is completely corrupt, and we are a little hopeless? I say yeah. Yes, so we have to do something. Yes, that was an interesting question. Yes, thank you.
I have been thinking about the Sanji from 3 minds, and I think the first one is like a Shijoshi, which you placed also on the 4th. I think it belongs to moral dimension. In other words, we want to purify our heart, and it could be an existential kind of attitude, no integrity, existential. So you are honest. And the second one, interestingly, I think this is also in Christianity and so, metanoia. You switch your mind. Metanoia is not just mental change, but the entire transformation of your attitude of life, no? Metanoia, and my Professor Panika talks about it. So deep mind, I think, is a little misleading in a way, but I think it's an epistemological dimension that has ontological existential connotation. And then the third one, this eco-Hotsugan. Hotsugan is bodhicitta. Eco is to transfer merits or recycle your whatever good deeds. So it's like a recycling bodhicitta, right? Bodhicitta, and I think this is really the commitment in the past. And then this, I think, is a bodhisattva practice, no? And it's a kind of sustained religious life. So I can understand these very kind of medieval Japanese words in a much more contemporary philosophical language, and perhaps you can reach more audience by, doing something, because the problem with Hōnen is very difficult to translate, and we get stuck in there. And we need to kind of imbue some different air, new fresh air. And I was just thinking about these things and in terms of religious practice in general. Any path, I think is applicable. Yeah, so that's it.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's ethical and actually called to number 2, epistemological. It definitely helped to clarify what's going on in each. Yes. Well, thank you. Yes, definitely.
Pues ya se nos acabó el tiempo, pero muchas gracias a todos por sus preguntas, porque ha sido una de las sesiones con más preguntas.